Welcome to day 278 of our BU 365-day challenge. Sharon Horne-Ellstrom here, and we're talking about paradoxes. We defined a paradox a couple days ago. It's kind of like an oxymoron, but it's a saying that it sounds absurd and ridiculous when you first hear it, but if you start to think about it, it tends to be true. So today's is what I call the impression paradox. And it basically says the more you try to impress people, the less impressed they'll be. Why? Because people can tell, we instinctually and intuitively can tell if people are faking it or just doing something or having something or behaving in a way in order to impress us. I did a lot of interviewing in corporate America as well as for my own businesses. And over the years, I think there's very few places that people try to impress more than in a job interview. So you can tell if people are faking it or if they're not being authentic. Thus my mug today, which says, no one is you, and that is your superpower. And if we remember that just being ourselves is really how we impress other people, that's the most important thing to do, which is kind of what this challenge is all about. It's about getting to know ourselves and understand ourselves better and becoming an ever-improving, better version of ourselves. That's kind of our job here on the planet, and our purpose is to become the best possible human being we can be. And again, that's defined by each and every one of us. Some people define best as who makes the most money. Other people define best as an artistic or a sport or something. However you define best is what's best for you. So I'm going to share 9 tips on making a great impression, a great first impression, because, you know, the saying goes, you only have one chance to make a first impression. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Your first impression is your first impression. And if that's a good impression, great. You leave people with a feeling of wanting to know more about you. If you have a bad first impression, it's really challenging and difficult to overcome that, because people will always have that first look at you in their mind. So I'll share 9 ways to do that. But our action item today is just to think about and notice how you're going about your life. Are you being just who you are and looking to improve that, or are you putting on airs, doing and behaving differently in different situations? When I was younger and in corporate America, I behaved differently, dressed differently, acted differently, or curtailed a lot of my personality in corporate America that I didn't have to do when I was running my own businesses. I could be myself. And I found that I was a whole lot happier just being myself, how I naturally was. Now, there were some rough edges, right? Over the years, I've had to smooth off a whole lot of different behaviors, but that was just to be a better human being, not because people gave me feedback in corporate America that said I was too much of this or too much of that, or not enough of this or not enough of that. So in my last corporate job, I actually was myself. I just said, this is what you get. I remember the interviewing process was really involved for that particular position, and I interviewed with a bunch of people and a bunch of executives in the company. It was a very large privately held company. And then I interviewed with the whole management team that I would be working with, as well as a few people that would be reporting to me. And we had this big group interview, and they all got to fire questions at me, and I just decided going into it, the only way to be and really enjoy this job was by just being myself. And it was by far the best and most rewarding, and the corporate job where I had the most personal growth and development, because I was adding on to who I already am, if that makes sense. So what are some ways that we can make a great first impression? What are some tips? Well, number 1, make eye contact. If you can't look people in the eye, you come off as not being trustworthy. Smile. People like it when you smile at them. Have you ever smiled at somebody and they didn't smile back, and then you smiled at them again, and it's like they cracked their facade and they had to smile back? Dress for the occasion. Guess what? In corporate America, it was appropriate that I dressed appropriate for the company I was working for, to represent them in the way that was expected. We have to meet the expectations of the environment that we're involved in. Or I say, you can always dress a little bit better, but you can't dress worse than the environment and get away with it, or very seldom, unless you're the, Steve Jobs, who always wears the same thing, or Mark Zuckerberg, who always wears the same thing, and you're at a level of a billionaire. You can do whatever you want, and we can always do whatever we want, but it's what's appropriate for the situation. Be authentic, be who you are. Don't pretend to be somebody else. If you want to be somebody else, turn into that person by becoming that type of person. Don't pretend that you're that person before you are. There's a lot of debate about that, the whole fake it till you make it thing. You can choose to fake it till you make it, but as you're faking it, the people that have already made it already know you're faking it, and you lose credibility and when you're not authentic. Be a good communicator. Always be improving your communication skills. That's one of those things, and I added it to my 9 life framework last year because I was getting coaching in communication and confidence, because they're 2 core foundational areas that if we're not continually improving them, we're deteriorating. If we're not improving and growing and continuously learning, we're losing, because the world around us is always changing, always growing, not always improving, depends on your point of view, but sometimes things are always changing, and if we're not changing along with it and growing and becoming a better version of ourselves, then we will fall behind. And if that's what you want, that's awesome, but I want to always be improving and always be learning. Use positive body language. Sit up straight, look people in the eye, again, eye contact. Smile, model their behavior, mirror their behavior when appropriate, but not in a creepy way. I think there's been so much teaching and coaching on how to mirror and mimic people, and people catch on to that really quickly. If you're doing it in an inauthentic way, people catch on. If you're doing it as part of natural human behavior and communication, then it doesn't come off as fake, and so people don't mind. But you want to use positive body language. That means open, happy, good energy about you whenever possible. Again, appropriate for the situation. Do your homework, do your research, and come prepared to whatever the situation is. You can always tell. I remember I've done literally thousands of interviews to hire people for different jobs and different positions in different companies, mine as well as corporations I was working for. And you can always tell whether somebody has done any research on the job and your company at all or not. And frankly, if they've done 0 research, they don't know anything about the company, they're not a fit for the organization. If they don't want it more than we want to hire them, they're not going to get the job, because if you don't do your research and your homework and you're not prepared, people know that. Think of back to school. We all were in school, and I guarantee there were some times when we all showed up and we weren't prepared. Maybe we read the wrong reading assignment, or we didn't do our homework, or we went to the basketball game instead of doing our reading for the night, and all of a sudden there's a pop quiz. We all know what that feels like, right? When we're not prepared. Pay attention and read the room. Pay attention to your surroundings. Pay attention to what's going on around you. And sometimes we don't need to make a first impression. We just need to stay back and watch what's going on. Practice different types of listening. Sometimes we're active listeners. Sometimes we are just casual listeners. But practice the different types of listening and always be improving your listening skills. And then ask questions. One of the best ways to make a great impression is not to talk and brag yourself up, but to ask questions about the other person and get to know what's important to them. The best impression you can make on someone is letting them talk and actually hearing what they have to say, listening, and having a real conversation with them. That leaves an incredibly good impression on people, unless you're grilling them and giving them, rapid firing questions, etc. So those are just some tips on how to make a great impression. This, our idiom for today is to make an impression. It's been around since the mid 1600s, and you can make a good impression or a bad impression, right? I like to ask myself, when I catch myself behaving in a way that doesn't feel authentic to me, the journalistic framework: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Who am I trying to impress? Why am I trying to impress that person? How am I thinking I'm going to impress that person? What am I going to do? What am I going to say? Where am I going to interact with this person? And I've learned over the years that the only person I really need to impress, the only person I need to surprise and delight is myself, right? The only person that I really need to impress by being better than I was before or doing something out of the ordinary for me is myself. So love to know. Our action item today is just to notice and ask yourself, I guess let's ask ourselves the who, what, where, when, why, and how of when we make an impression and how we make a first impression. You know, the who, what, where, when, why, and how of making a first impression or making an impression on someone. Are we trying to impress people? Are we trying? If we're having to try and not just being ourselves, then that doesn't usually work, and it usually doesn't impress other people. You know, it's all the people on social media and the fake people on social media. If you have already successfully done something and you see other people bragging about something that they've done, or driving, you know, Lamborghinis and stuff, and you actually own a Lamborghini and drive a Lamborghini, you just laugh at people because you know that they just rented that Lamborghini to take a picture with it on social media, especially if you only see them in it once or with one picture of it ever, and they use that same picture over and over and over again. Or if they do an event at a rented Airbnb mansion and you only ever see them do one event there because they want to put on airs as if they're super successful and that's their house, yada, yada, yada. But we can all see through that. Anyway, that's our topic for today. What kind of an impression do you want to leave people with? I think that's the most important question we need to ask ourselves. And I think the absolute best example you can be for people on the planet is to be yourself, because that gives everyone else permission to be themselves as well. All right, questions, hit me up. Otherwise, I'll be with you tomorrow.